The sound of the slap echoed louder than the heart monitor. Dr. Preston, the hospital's golden boy, didn't just berate the new nurse. He put his hands on her. He wove his fingers into her hair and yanked her back, sneering, "Know your place, trash." The entire ER froze. They expected the quiet, timid nurse to cry. They expected her to beg for forgiveness. But they didn't know that the woman standing in those oversized blue scrubs wasn't just a nurse. She was Major Harper Bennett, a decorated combat veteran from the 160th SOAR who had performed surgery in the back of burning Black Hawks. And Dr. Preston. He just made the biggest mistake of his life. Seattle Grace Memorial was a battlefield just of a different kind. Instead of mortar shells and IEDs, there were cardiac arrests, overdose victims, and the incessant piercing wail of ambulance sirens. Harper Bennett moved through the chaos of the emergency room with a silence that unnerved people. She was 32, though her eyes looked 100. She had been working at the hospital for 3 months, and in that time she had spoken less than 50 words to her colleagues. She did the grunt work. She cleaned the bedpans, she restocked the saline drips, and she took the night shifts that none of the senior nurses wanted. To the staff, she was a nobody. A travel nurse from nowhere with a shaky resume and a demeanor that suggested she was afraid of her own shadow. "Bennett, move it." The shout came from Dr. Silas Preston. Preston was the chief of trauma surgery. He was 45, handsome in a way that he was painfully aware of, and possessed an ego that barely fit through the double doors of the trauma bay. He came from old money, the Prestons of Connecticut, and he treated the hospital staff like his personal servants. Harper didn't flinch at his tone. She simply picked up the tray of sterilized instruments and walked over to Trauma Bay 4, where Preston was stitching up a laceration on a drunk college student. "You're late," Preston sneered, not looking up from his work. "I asked for these 30 seconds ago. Do you know how much my time is worth, Bennett?" "Apologies, doctor," Harper said. Her voice was low, flat, and devoid of emotion. Preston scoffed. "Apologies don't save lives. Competence does. Try to acquire some." He snatched a hemostat from the tray, deliberately brushing his hand against hers, then wiping his glove on his gown as if she were contagious. The other nurses clustered by the nurses' station watched with a mixture of pity and relief. Relief that it wasn't them in the firing line today. "He's in a mood," whispered Chloe, a young nurse with bright pink scrubs. "His stock portfolio probably took a hit." "Or his wife found out about the pharmaceutical rep," muttered David, the head charge nurse. He sighed, watching Harper retreat into the shadows of the supply closet. "I don't know how Bennett takes it. She has 0 backbone. If he talked to me like that, I thought I'd report him to HR." "HR won't touch him," Chloe replied. "His dad is on the board. Bennett is just easy prey. She's like a ghost. I asked her where she'd transferred from yesterday, and she just stared at me until I walked away." Inside the supply closet, Harper Bennett leaned her forehead against the cool metal of the shelving unit. She took a breath. In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. They had been steady in the Korangal Valley when an RPG hit her convoy. They had been steady when she had to pack the chest wound of her commanding officer, Captain Miller, while taking fire from a ridgeline 300 meters away. She wasn't afraid of a man like Silas Preston. Men like him were soft. They broke when the air conditioning went out. Harper had survived things that would make Preston catatonic. She adjusted the long sleeves of her undershirt. She wore them even in the stifling heat of the ER. They hid the shrapnel scarring on her left forearm and the tattoo on her right wrist, the insignia of the Night Stalkers, the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. She wasn't here for glory. She was here to reintegrate, to learn how to be a civilian again. The military had medically discharged her after the incident in Syria, a classified extraction mission gone wrong. She was cleared for duty physically, but the psychologists said she needed time in a low-stress environment. So she scrubbed floors and let a pompous surgeon treat her like a servant. It was part of the mission. Blend in. Don't engage. Ça va. "Bennett!" Preston's voice roared from the hallway. "Get out here! We have an incoming multi-trauma!" Harper opened her eyes. The steel returned to her gaze. She pushed off the shelf and walked back into the fray. The sliding doors of the ER burst open. The paramedics rushed in, pushing 2 gurneys surrounded by a flurry of activity. The air instantly smelled of copper blood and rain. "Talk to me!" Preston shouted, taking center stage, puffing his chest out. Male, roughly 50 multiple gunshot wounds to the chest and abdomen. The lead paramedic yelled over the noise. "BP is crashing 70/40. Tachycardic. We lost his pulse twice on the way in." "Bay 1, Preston ordered. "David, get a line in. Chloe, get the blood bank on the phone. Bennett." He spun around, his eyes wild with the adrenaline rush he craved. "You're on suction. Don't mess it up." Harper moved into position at the head of the bed. She looked down at the patient. He was a large man, built like a tank, with a grey beard and a tactical vest that had been cut open by the paramedics. Underneath the gore, she saw a tattoo on his shoulder. A dagger with wings. Her heart skipped a beat. Special Forces. She looked at his face. It was swollen and bruised, but she recognized the structure. It was Master Sergeant Knox. Fort Knox. He had been her training officer at Fort Bragg almost a decade ago. "He's crashing," David yelled. "VFib. Paddles!" Preston screamed. "Charge to 200. The room exploded into controlled chaos. Harper grabbed the suction catheter, clearing the airway with practiced efficiency. She noticed something Preston missed. The blood wasn't just pooling, it was bubbling. Tension pneumothorax, her mind registered instantly. His lung has collapsed and is putting pressure on the heart. "Clear!" Preston yelled. He slammed the paddles onto Knox's chest. The body convulsed. "Still VFib," David said. "Charge to 300. "Doctor," Harper said, her voice cutting through the noise. It wasn't the whisper she usually used. It was firmer. Breath sounds are absent on the right. Trachea is deviated. It's a tension pneumo. Shocking him won't work. He needs a needle decompression. Now. The room went silent for a fraction of a second. Preston looked at her, his face reddening with rage. "Excuse me. Are you a doctor, Bennett? Did you go to med school or did you just get your degree from a cereal box?" "Look at the jugular distension," Harper insisted, pointing to the patient's neck. "If you don't decompress the chest, he dies in 30 seconds. "Shut up," Preston roared. "I am the attending surgeon here. You are a nurse. You change bedpans and you shut your mouth. Charge to 360. "Clear." He shocked Knox again. Nothing. Flatline. "Damn it." Preston threw the paddles onto the crash cart. "He's gone. Call it." "No," Harper said. She didn't think. She didn't calculate the consequences. She just moved. She stepped away from the suction unit and grabbed a 14-gauge angio-cath needle from the open supply tray. "What do you think you're doing?" Preston stepped in front of her, blocking the patient. "Move," Harper said. Her eyes were cold, dark tunnels. "Get out of my trauma bay," Preston screamed. "You are fired, get out." "He has a pulsable rhythm, but the pressure is killing him," Harper said, stepping to the side to bypass him. "I'm not letting him die because of your ego." That was the breaking point. Dr. Silas Preston, a man who had never been told no in his entire life, snapped. He reached out and grabbed Harper by the back of her scrub cap, entangling his fingers in her hair. He yanked her head back with violent force. "I said—" Preston hissed, his face inches from hers, spittle flying from his lips. "Know your place, you worthless piece of trash!" The violence of the motion sent Harper stumbling back. She hit the metal cabinetry with a loud clang, the needle clattering to the floor. The entire ER stopped. Doctors froze mid-suture. Nurses dropped charts. The silence was absolute. Violence against staff was rare. But for an attending surgeon to physically assault a nurse in the middle of a code, it was unheard of. Preston stood there, chest heaving, his face twisted in a snarl. He felt powerful. He felt like a god disciplining a disobedient child. He expected Harper to crumble. He expected tears. He expected her to run out of the room, sobbing, leaving him to declare the patient dead and go about his day. Harper slowly lowered her head. She reached up and touched the back of her head where he had pulled her hair. She adjusted her scrub cap. When she looked up, the fear that everyone expected to see wasn't there. The quiet nurse was gone. In her place was something else entirely. Her posture shifted, her shoulders squared, her feet spread slightly to shoulder-width apart, a combat stance. "You shouldn't have done that," Harper said. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried a weight that made the hair on the back of David's neck stand up. "Get security," Preston barked, though his voice wavered slightly. "Get this woman out of my hospital." "David," Harper said, not looking away from Preston. "Give me a 10-blade and a chest tube kit." "Bennett, stop!" David stammered, terrified. "He's the chief." Harper didn't wait. She moved. But this time she didn't walk like a nurse. She moved with the explosive speed of a viper. Preston tried to grab her arm again. "I told you to." Harper didn't strike him. She didn't need to. As Preston reached for her, she simply stepped into his guard, trapped his wrist with one hand, and applied pressure to the radial nerve while sweeping his leg. It happened so fast that the security camera footage would later have to be played in slow motion to understand it. 1 second, Preston was standing. The next, he was face down on the linoleum floor, his arm twisted behind his back at an angle that made him scream in high-pitched agony. "Stay down," Harper commanded. It wasn't a request. It was an order given by an officer to a hostile combatant. She released him, stepped over his groaning body, and walked to the patient. She picked up a fresh needle. "David, time me," she said calmly. She located the second intercostal space on Knox's chest. She plunged the needle in. Hiss. The sound of pressurized air escaping the chest cavity was audible throughout the silent room. The monitor on the wall beeped. Once, twice, beep, 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 sinus rhythm. The heart was beating again. Harper looked down at Preston, who was struggling to his knees, clutching his wrist, his face purple with humiliation and shock. "He's alive," Harper said, stripping off her gloves. "And you, doctor, are relieved of duty." Preston scrambled up, his eyes bulging. "Relieved of duty? I am the chief surgeon. You assaulted me. I will have you arrested. I will destroy you. Do you know who I am?" Harper looked him dead in the eye. She reached for the hem of her long-sleeve undershirt and slowly pulled it up, revealing the scarred, corded muscle of her forearm and the distinctive tattoo on her wrist. "I know who you are, Preston. You're a liability." She turned to the stunned charge nurse. "Call the police, and call General Holloway at the Pentagon. Tell him Ghost has been compromised." "General? Who?" David asked, his jaw hanging open. "Just make the call," Harper said, turning back to stabilize her former sergeant. "And keep this idiot away from my patient." The arrival of the Seattle Police Department was not subtle. 2 uniformed officers, followed by a frantic hospital administrator, pushed through the double doors of the ER. Dr. Silas Preston was waiting for them, leaning against the nurse's station, holding an ice pack to his wrist. He had regained his composure, replacing his fear with a cold, calculated narrative. "That's her," Preston said, pointing a trembling finger at Harper. Harper was standing by Trauma Bay 1, watching the cardiac monitor of Master Sergeant Knox. The patient was stable, his chest rising and falling rhythmically thanks to the tube she had inserted. She hadn't tried to run. She hadn't tried to hide. She stood with her hands clasped behind her back, at parade rest, waiting. "Officer," Preston said, his voice dripping with practiced victimhood. "This woman is unstable. She disobeyed a direct medical order, endangered a patient's life, and when I tried to intervene, she physically assaulted me. She nearly broke my wrist. I want to press charges. Immediately." The older officer, a man named Sergeant Brady, looked at Harper. She didn't look like a threat. She looked small in her oversized scrubs, her face impassive. "Ma'am?" Brady approached her, his hand resting near his holster. "Step away from the patient." Harper turned slowly. "The patient is stable, Sergeant, but he needs a transport to the ICU. His vitals are holding, but the pneumothorax needs monitoring." "I didn't ask for a medical opinion," Brady snapped, influenced by the chief surgeon's presence. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." Harper complied. She didn't resist as the cold steel of the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. The sound was sharp and final, cutting through the murmurs of the ER staff. "You can't do this, David." The charge nurse stepped forward, his voice shaking. "She saved that man's life. Preston was going to let him die." "David," Preston barked, his eyes narrowing into slits. "Unless you want to be looking for a job at a veterinary clinic in Alaska, I suggest you shut your mouth. This is a police matter now." David froze. He looked at Harper, his eyes pleading for forgiveness for his cowardice. Harper just gave him a nearly imperceptible nod. "Stand down," the look said. "This isn't your fight." "Get her out of here," Preston sneered. "And make sure the press doesn't see her. I don't want this hospital associated with psychopaths." As the officers marched Harper through the crowded ER, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Patients on gurneys watched in silence. Doctors avoided eye contact. But the nurses, the ones who changed the sheets, cleaned the vomit and held the hands of the dying. They watched Harper with a strange new respect. They had seen the takedown. They knew the truth. Just as they reached the exit, a man in a tailored charcoal suit burst through the administrative doors. It was Sterling Preston, the chairman of the hospital board and Silas's father. He was a silver-haired shark of a man, known for burying lawsuits and ruining careers. "Silas," Sterling boomed, ignoring the police. "I got your text. Is it true a nurse attacked you?" "She's crazy, Dad," Silas whined, dropping the professional facade instantly. "She nearly broke my arm, my surgical hand." Sterling turned his gaze on Harper. His eyes were like ice, He walked up to her, invading her personal space, staring down his nose. "You have made a grave mistake, young lady," Sterling hissed. "I will ensure you never work in healthcare again. I will sue you for every penny you will ever make. By the time I'm done with you, you'll be lucky to get a job sweeping streets." Harper looked at him. She didn't blink. She didn't cower. She analyzed him: high blood pressure, likely on beta blockers, narcissistic personality traits, aggression born of entitlement, not capability, threat level low. "Move along," Sergeant Brady said, gently pushing Harper forward. As they shoved her into the back of the squad car, Harper allowed herself a single glance back at the hospital. She saw Silas Preston standing in the ambulance bay, smirking his father's arm around his shoulder. They thought they had won. They thought this was about a lawsuit or a firing. Harper leaned her head against the wire mesh of the police car window. She closed her eyes and began to count. 1 minute since the call to Holloway. The extraction team should be spinning up. The war hadn't ended for Harper Bennett. It had just changed battlefields. The interrogation room at the 4th Precinct was a drab box of grey cinder blocks and a flickering fluorescent light that buzzed like a dying fly. Harper sat on a metal chair, one hand cuffed to the table. She had been there for 2 hours. Detective Reed sat across from her. He was a tired man, with coffee stains on his tie, and a demeanor that suggested he had seen it all. He tossed a file onto the table. "Harper Bennett," Reed said, leaning back. "No prior record. Nursing license is clean, though it's only 3 months old. Before that, nothing. A ghost." Harper said nothing. She stared at a spot on the wall just above his left shoulder. "Look, Harper," Reed sighed, trying the good cop routine. "Dr. Preston is a powerful man. His father practically owns this city. They are pushing for felony assault charges, assault with a deadly weapon, claiming you used a scalpel." Harper's eyes shifted to Reed. "I didn't use a scalpel on him. If I had used a blade, he wouldn't be standing." Reed paused, unnerved by the flat, factual delivery. "Right. Well, he says you threatened him. Witnesses are terrified to speak up. If you give me your side of the story, maybe we can knock this down to a misdemeanor. Community service. Anger management. I want my phone call," Harper said. "You can call a lawyer," Reed said. "But a public defender won't stand a chance against the Preston family's legal team. They're coming for blood." "I don't need a lawyer," Harper said. "I need to make one call." Reed groaned and pushed a landline phone across the table. "Make it quick." Harper picked up the receiver. She didn't dial a local number. She dialed a sequence that Reed didn't recognize too many digits. "This is Sierra 709er. Harper spoke into the phone, her voice shifting into a command cadence that Reed had never heard from a suspect before. "Code Black. Location Seattle PD Precinct 4. Hostage situation. I am the hostage." She hung up. Reed stared at her. "What was that? Who did you call?" "You might want to get some coffee." "Detective," Harper said calmly, "it's going to be a long night." Before Reed could respond, the door to the interrogation room banged open. But it wasn't another cop. It was a lawyer in a 3-piece suit that cost more than Reed's annual salary. Charles Whitlock, the Preston family attorney. He didn't look at Reed. He looked at Harper with a mixture of boredom and disdain. "Ms. Bennett," Whitlock said, placing a leather briefcase on the table. "I'm here to offer you a way out. A deal." He slid a document toward her. "Sign this. It admits that you suffered a mental break, apologizes to Dr. Preston, and agrees to the immediate revocation of your nursing license. In exchange, the Prestons will drop the criminal charges. You leave Seattle tonight and we never hear from you again. Harper looked at the paper. It was a surrender, a confession to things she didn't do. And if I don't? She asked. Whitlock smiled, a predatory showing of teeth. Then you go to prison. Simple as that. We have the judges. We have the DA. You are nobody, Ms. Bennett. You are a bug on the windshield of a very expensive car. Harper picked up the pen. Whitlock's smile widened. She spun the pen in her fingers, a habit from her sniper days when checking windage. You checked my nursing license, Harper said softly. But did you check my DD-214? Whitlock frowned. Your what? My military discharge papers. Irrelevant. Whitlock waved his hand. Whatever you did in the army, peeling potatoes, driving trucks, it doesn't matter here. Boom. The heavy steel door of the precinct's holding area slammed open with enough force to shake the walls. What the hell is going on out there? Reed stood up, reaching for his weapon. Voices were shouting in the hallway. Not police voices. These were louder, deeper, authoritative voices. Federal agents, stand down. Step away from the door. The door to the interrogation room was kicked open. Two men in full tactical gear, carrying carbines, stepped into the room, scanning the corners instantly. They were followed by a man in a crisp army green service uniform. 3 stars glistened on his shoulder boards. Lieutenant General Holloway. Reed's jaw dropped. He instinctively took his hand off his gun and raised his hands. Whitlock looked confused, annoyed. Excuse me, Whitlock shouted. This is a private interrogation. You can't just barge in here. Do you know who my client is? General Holloway ignored the lawyer completely. He walked straight to Harper, who was still cuffed to the table. The general, a man who had commanded entire theaters of war, stopped in front of the nurse. He stood at attention. Major, Holloway said, nodding to Harper. General, Harper replied. Get these cuffs off her. Holloway ordered, glancing at Reed. Now wait a minute. Whitlock stepped between them. She is under arrest for assaulting a prominent surgeon. You have no jurisdiction here. Holloway turned to Whitlock. The look he gave the lawyer was the kind of look usually reserved for enemy insurgents. Jurisdiction. Holloway's voice was low and dangerous. Son, this woman is a protected asset of the United States government. The man she assaulted nearly killed a highly decorated master sergeant who is currently under my protection. And you, he poked a finger into Whitlock's expensive suit, are interfering with a federal investigation into medical malpractice and negligence affecting a Tier 1 operator. Medical malpractice, Whitlock stammered. Unlock her, Holloway barked at Reed. Reed fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking, and unlocked the handcuffs. Harper stood up, rubbing her wrists. Did they harm you, Major? Holloway asked. Negative, sir, Harper said. Just wasted my time. Good, Holloway said. We have a chopper waiting at the helipad. Knox is awake. He's asking for you. Harper turned to Whitlock, who was pale and sweating. She leaned in close. Tell Preston that the bug just hit back. The rooftop of Seattle Grace Memorial had been converted into a temporary command post. 2 military police officers stood guard at the doors, and a Black Hawk helicopter sat idling on the pad, its rotors slowly turning. Inside the VIP suite on the top floor, usually reserved for wealthy donors, Master Sergeant Knox lay in a bed surrounded by equipment that was far more advanced than what the ER possessed. The military had brought their own medical team. Harper walked in now, dressed in a clean flight suit provided by Holloway's team. She looked more like herself. The scrubs had always felt like a costume. Knox opened his eyes. He looked rough tubes in his nose, bruising covering half his body. But he was alive. He saw Harper, and a weak grin spread through his beard. "Ghost," he rasped. "I thought I saw you. Thought I was dead, and you were the angel of death coming to collect." "Not today, Top," Harper said, taking his hand. "You had a collapsed lung. The local butcher nearly fried your heart trying to shock a rhythm that wasn't there." "The surgeon?" Knox asked, coughing slightly. "Taken care of," Harper said. General Holloway stood by the window looking out at the city skyline. "Not fully, Major. We have a problem." Harper turned. "Sir." "Sterling Preston isn't backing down," Holloway said grimly. "He's calling in favors, senators, governors. He's spinning this narrative that you are a rogue soldier with PTSD who snapped and attacked a doctor. He's going to the press in an hour." Harper's jaw tightened. "Let him." "It's not that simple," Holloway said. "If he digs too deep, he might find out about Operation Cinder, the Syria mission." The room went cold. Operation Cinder was the reason Harper had left the service. It was a classified extraction where things had gone wrong, horribly wrong. Civilians had died because of bad intel provided by the CIA, but the blame had almost fallen on Harper's unit. It was redacted, buried, and sealed. "If he exposes that," Harper said quietly, "my team gets dragged through the mud. The families of the fallen." "Exactly," Holloway said. "Sterling Preston is threatening to release anonymous leaks claiming you were dishonorably discharged for war crimes unless we hand you over to the civilian authorities and issue a public apology. He's holding my reputation hostage to save his son's ego," Harper realized. "He's declaring war," Knox grunted from the bed. "So we fight." "How?" Harper asked. "We can't silence a civilian billionaire without causing a national incident." "We don't silence him," Holloway said, a small, cunning smile appearing on his face. "We let him speak, and then we bury him with the truth." Holloway tossed a tablet to Harper. "While you were in the cell, my intelligence officers did a little digging into Dr. Silas Preston and his father's hospital administration. It turns out your incident wasn't the first time Silas messed up." Harper scrolled through the files. Her eyes widened. "Case 402, wrongful death, settled out of court. NDA signed. Case 519, amputation of wrong limb, settled out of court. NDA signed. Case 660, overdose due to medication error, scrubbed from records." There were dozens of them, a trail of bodies and hush money. Silas Preston wasn't just arrogant, he was incompetent and dangerous, and his father had been using the hospital's funds to pay off victims for a decade. "This is a graveyard," Harper whispered. "It's leverage," Holloway corrected. "But we need more than files. We need a witness. Someone on the inside who can testify that these records are real and that Sterling Preston ordered the cover-ups." Harper thought back to the ER. The fear in the nurse's eyes. The way David, the charge nurse, had tried to speak up but was terrified. And the young nurse Kinsley with the pink scrubs. "I know someone," Harper said. "Nurse Kinsley. She sees everything. She manages the digital archives for the trauma unit." "She's a civilian," Holloway warned. "If we approach her, we put a target on her back." "She's already a target," Harper said, standing up. "Preston terrorizes that staff. If we give them a chance to fight back, they will." "You want to go back down there?" Holloway asked. "Into the lion's den?" "I need to get Kinsley out before Preston purges the servers," Harper said, zipping up her flight suit. "If he knows we have the files, he'll delete the backups. I need the hard drives." "You have 1 hour before Preston's press conference." Holloway checked his watch. "I can't send troops into a civilian hospital to steal hard drives. It's illegal." Harper walked to the door. She looked back, her eyes gleaming with the intensity that had earned her the call sign Ghost. "You're not sending troops, General. I'm just a nurse going to pick up her last paycheck." The basement of Seattle Grace Memorial was a labyrinth of steam pipes, humming generators, and linen carts. It was a world away from the sterile lights of the floors above, and it was Harper Bennett's element. She had shed the flight suit, swapping it for a janitorial jumpsuit she'd swiped from a laundry cart near the loading dock. She moved through the shadows, avoiding the security cameras she had memorized during her 3 months of employment. Her target was the IT server room on the 4th floor, adjacent to the administrative offices. She wasn't alone. General Holloway couldn't send troops in, but he could provide eyes. Through a small earpiece, an intelligence officer from the helicopter above was guiding her. "Major, be advised, we have 4 private security contractors moving through the lobby. Sterling Preston has hired muscle. They aren't hospital security. They're armed." "Copy," Harper whispered, pressing herself against a concrete pillar as a maintenance worker walked by, oblivious. "What's their ROE?" "Unknown. But based on Sterling's profile, they are likely authorized to detain you by any means necessary. Do not engage unless compromised." Harper reached the service elevator. She used a master key card she had lifted from a careless orderly weeks ago. The doors slid open. She stepped in and punched the button for the 4th floor. As the elevator rose, Harper checked her makeshift weapon, a wrench she'd found in the janitor's cart. It wasn't a rifle, but in close quarters, it would break a knee or shatter a wrist just fine. Ding! The doors opened. The hallway was quiet, lined with plush carpet and mahogany doors. This was the executive wing. Harper moved fast. She reached the door marked Server Archives. It was locked. She didn't have the code. "Open the door, Kinsley," she whispered, hoping the nurse was inside. Silence. "Kinsley, it's Bennett. I know you're in there. I know about the black file." A moment later, the electronic lock buzzed. The door cracked open. Nurse Kinsley stood there, her face pale, eyes red from crying. She pulled Harper inside and locked the door behind her. The room was cold, filled with the hum of cooling fans and blinking blue lights. "You shouldn't have come back," Kinsley said, her voice trembling. "They're looking for you. Sterling Preston has men sweeping the floors. He told them you have a weapon." "I do," Harper said, tapping her head. "I have the truth. Where are the drives?" Kinsley pointed to a workstation. A progress bar on the screen showed deletion in progress, 85%. "They're wiping it remotely," Kinsley sobbed. "Sterling called it 10 minutes ago. He ordered a system update that's actually a total purge of the last 10 years of surgical logs. Once that hits 100%, the proof of Silas's mistakes, the deaths, the cover-ups, it's all gone." "Can you stop it?" Harper asked. "I tried. I'm locked out of the admin controls." Harper looked at the rack of servers. "If we can't stop the software, we take the hardware." She moved to the main server tower. "Which drive holds the surgical backups?" "Bay 3 Drive D," Kinsley said. Harper reached for the release latch on the hard drive bay. Crash! The door to the server room didn't just open. It was kicked off its hinges. 2 men in dark suits burst in. They weren't police, they were thick-necked, dead-eyed mercenaries. One of them held a stun baton. The other held a suppressed pistol. "Step away from the server," the man with the gun barked. Kinsley screamed and dropped to the floor. Harper didn't freeze. She calculated. Distance, 10 feet. Threat, firearm. Solution, violence of action. "Don't shoot," Harper yelled, raising her hands, feigning panic. "I'm just a janitor." The gunman hesitated for a microsecond, confused by the jumpsuit. That was all Harper needed. She threw the wrench. It wasn't a random throw. It spun through the air and struck the gunman squarely in the bridge of the nose. He howled his head, snapping back the gun, firing a round into the ceiling plaster. Harper launched herself forward. She tackled the man with the stun baton before he could raise it. They hit the floor hard. He was strong, likely former military, but he fought with anger. Harper fought with physics. She blocked a punch, drove her elbow into his solar plexus, and then wrapped her legs around his neck in a triangle choke. He thrashed, trying to gouge her eyes, but Harper squeezed. Her thighs were like iron cords. 3 seconds. 4 seconds. The man's eyes rolled back. He went limp. Harper rolled off him and scrambled for the gun the first man had dropped. She kicked it across the room under the server racks. She didn't want to kill them. She just wanted to finish the mission. She ran back to the server. Deletion, 98%. "It's too late," Kinsley cried. "No." Harper gritted her teeth. She grabbed the handle of the hard drive bay and yanked. It was locked in place. "Harper, look out!" Harper spun around. Silas Preston was standing in the doorway. He looked manic, his tie undone, sweat dripping down his face. He was holding the gun she had kicked away. "You ruined everything," Silas screamed, the gun shaking in his hand. "My life, my reputation. I am a god in this city." "You're a butcher, Silas," Harper said, standing in front of Kinsley to shield her. "And it's over. It's over when I say it's over." Silas cocked the hammer. "Drop it, Preston." The voice came from the hallway. Silas spun around. Standing there wasn't the police. It wasn't Genturel Halloway. It was the nurses. 20 of them. David Chloe nurses from pediatrics oncology and the ICU. They stood shoulder to shoulder, blocking the hallway. They weren't armed with guns. They held IV poles, heavy oxygen tanks, and clipboards. They looked terrified, but they weren't moving. "Get out of my way," Silas yelled, aiming the gun at them. "I'll fire, I swear to God." "No, you won't," David said, stepping forward. "Because there are cameras everywhere, Silas, and we're all witnesses. You can't fire everyone." Silas wavered. The weight of the moment, the sheer number of people standing against him, cracked his fragile ego. While his attention was split, Harper moved. She didn't attack him. She reached back and ripped the hard drive out of the server rack with a grunt of exertion, snapping the plastic locking mechanism. The screen went black. Silas turned back to Harper, his eyes wide. "Give that to me." Harper held the drive up. "You want it? Come and get it." Sirens wailed outside. The real police had arrived. Not the ones on Sterling's payroll, the state police called in by Halloway. Silas looked at the gun, then at Harper, then at the nurses. He dropped the gun. He fell to his knees, covering his face with his hands, sobbing like a child. Harper walked past him, stepping over his legs. She looked at David and the other nurses. "Thanks for the backup," she said softly. "We stick together." David smiled nervously. "Trauma team, right?" Harper nodded. She looked at the hard drive in her hand. "Let's go watch the news." The grand atrium of Seattle Grace Memorial was less a hospital lobby and more a cathedral to corporate medicine. Polished marble floors reflected the glare of 100 camera flashes, and the air was thick with the hum of reporters and the scent of expensive cologne. Sterling Preston stood at a mahogany podium bathed in the harsh white light of the media. He looked every inch the grieving, concerned leader. He wore a suit that cost more than a nurse's annual salary, and his face was arranged in a mask of practiced solemnity. Behind him stood the hospital board members, a row of grey suits nodding in sycophantic rhythm. "Ladies and gentlemen of the press," Sterling began, his voice smooth baritone and commanding. He leaned into the cluster of microphones, his eyes scanning the room. "It is with a heavy heart that I must address the violent incident that occurred within these walls earlier today. We pride ourselves on being a sanctuary of healing, but today that sanctuary was violated." He paused for effect, letting the reporters lean in. A disturbed individual. Sterling continued, his tone hardening. "A former soldier, Harper Bennett, whom we hired in good faith as a temp nurse, suffered a severe psychotic break. Suffering from untreated PTSD, she infiltrated our trauma unit, endangered the life of a critical patient, and launched a vicious, unprovoked physical assault on my son, Chief Surgeon Silas Preston." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Pens scratched furiously against notepads. Sterling had them in the palm of his hand. He was painting a masterpiece of lies. "We are cooperating fully with the authorities to apprehend this dangerous woman," Sterling said, raising his voice slightly to drown out a question from a CNN reporter. "We have evidence that she has a history of instability. We will not rest until she is behind bars, ensuring the safety of our staff and our patients. This hospital will not be held hostage by a rogue element." Above the podium, the massive 8K LED wall, usually reserved for displaying donor names and looping videos of smiling doctors, flickered. At first, it was just a glitch. A jagged line of static cut through the hospital logo. Sterling didn't notice. He was too busy condemning Harper. "Let this be a warning that we have zero tolerance for violence." ZZZRT. The static grew louder, a harsh electronic tear that made several people in the front row cover their ears. The hospital logo distorted, twisting into digital noise before the screen went black. Sterling frowned, looking over his shoulder. "Technical difficulties," he muttered to an aide. "Fix it, now." But the screen didn't stay black. A grainy black and white image flickered into existence. It was security footage. The timestamp in the corner read, "Today, 1400 hours." The angle was high, looking down into Trauma Bay 1. The image was undeniable. It showed a patient flatlining. It showed Harper Bennett pleading her body language, desperate but controlled. And it showed Dr. Silas Preston standing over the patient, not helping but sneering. Then the audio kicked in. It wasn't the tinny sound of a security feed. It had been boosted, clarified. "Know your place, trash." The voice of the chief surgeon boomed through the atrium's concert-quality speakers. It echoed off the marble walls, louder than the press corps, louder than the traffic outside. The video showed the slap. It showed Silas Preston weaving his fingers into Harper's hair and yanking her head back with vicious, arrogant force. The collective gasp from the room sucked the oxygen out of the air. Flashbulbs stopped popping. The silence was absolute, save for the looping video on the giant screen. Sterling Preston's face drained of color. He looked like a man who had been punched in the gut. He turned to his tech team, his composure cracking. "Cut the feed. Cut it now. Who is doing this?" But the video changed. The assault footage shrank to the corner of the screen, replaced by a scrolling waterfall of documents. These weren't public records. These were PDFs, stamped confidential, do not distribute, and NDA signed. Medical error report number 402. Patient deceased. Cause surgical negligence. Surgeon Silas Preston. Action settlement. Paid 2.5 mult. Cover-up. authorized by Sterling Preston. The reporters gasped again. A frenzy erupted. Cameras zoomed in on the screen, capturing the evidence of years of buried bodies. Incident number 519, wrong limb amputation. Incident number 660, lethal overdose. Status scrubbed from Soul Server. "This is fake," Sterling screamed, grabbing the microphone, his voice cracking into a high-pitched shriek. "This is a cyber attack. These are AI-generated lies. Security. Clear the room. I want everyone out. They look real enough to me, Mr. Preston." The deep voice cut through Sterling's panic. The heavy glass revolving doors at the main entrance stopped spinning. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. Lieutenant General Holloway walked in. He was not wearing dress blues this time. He was in full combat fatigues, flanked by 4 military police officers carrying carbines and 2 Washington state troopers. The aura of authority they projected was heavier than the building itself. And walking right beside the general was Harper Bennett. She hadn't changed. She was still wearing the dirty blue maintenance jumpsuit she had stolen from the basement. Her face was smudged with grease, and she held a shattered computer hard drive in her hand, like a weapon. Sterling froze. He gripped the sides of the podium until his knuckles turned white. He looked for his security team, but his hired mercenaries were nowhere to be seen, likely already zip-tied in the basement. "You," Sterling hissed, pointing a trembling finger at Harper. "You did this. Officers, arrest her. She stole confidential property. She hacked our systems." The lead state trooper, a tall man with a jaw of granite, stepped onto the raised platform. He walked past Harper without even looking at her. He marched straight up to Sterling Preston. "Sterling Preston," the trooper said, his voice booming without a microphone. "You are under arrest." Sterling recoiled. "Excuse me, do you know who I am?" "I am the chairman of this board. I dine with the governor." "You are under arrest," the trooper repeated, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt, "for conspiracy to commit fraud, obstruction of justice, tampering with evidence, and accessory to negligent homicide. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." "This is insanity," Sterling spat, struggling as the trooper spun him around. "I will sue this department into the ground. I will have your badge. Harper Bennett is the criminal here." Harper walked up the steps of the stage. The cameras turned to her, 1,000 lenses, focusing on the woman in the janitor suit. She stopped inches from Sterling. Up close, the billionaire looked small. He looked terrified. "I'm not a criminal, Sterling," Harper said, her voice calm, amplified by the microphone Sterling had just been screaming into. "And I'm not a ghost." She held up the hard drive. "But ghosts do haunt you for your sins," she whispered, loud enough for only him to hear. "Consider yourself haunted." As the trooper dragged a kicking and screaming Sterling off the stage, the elevator doors behind the podium opened. 2 more officers emerged, leading Dr. Silas Preston. He wasn't screaming. He was weeping. His hands were cuffed behind his back. His white coat hung off one shoulder, and he looked at the floor, unable to meet the eyes of the staff he had tormented for years. The atrium fell silent again, as the Prestons were loaded into the back of waiting police cruisers, the flashing blue lights reflecting off the glass walls. Then a single sound broke the silence. Clap. It was slow, deliberate. Harper turned. On the mezzanine balcony overlooking the atrium, Master Sergeant Knox sat in a wheelchair, pushed by a military medic. He was pale, hooked up to portable oxygen, but his hands were coming together. Clap, clap. Then David, the charge nurse, stepped out from the crowd of staff. He clapped. Then Kinsley, wiping tears from her eyes. Then Chloe. Then the surgeons who had been too afraid to speak up. The sound swelled. It grew from a trickle to a roar. The reporters, the patients, the janitors, the doctors, everyone was applauding. It wasn't polite applause. It was a thunderous ovation, a release of tension that had gripped the hospital for years. They weren't cheering for a celebrity. They were cheering for the woman in the grease-stained jumpsuit who had stood in the fire and refused to burn. Harper stood there uncomfortable with the praise. She shifted her weight, looking for an exit. General Holloway stepped up beside her, a rare smile breaking his stony expression. "You know, Major," Holloway said, leaning in, "that was one hell of an extraction. I think you might be overqualified for changing bedpans." Harper looked at the hard drive, then handed it to a federal agent waiting nearby. "It needed to be done, sir. The Pentagon has a new initiative," Holloway continued, watching the crowd. "Medical rapid response teams for high-risk zones. We need someone who can handle a scalpel and a crisis in equal measure. Someone who doesn't blink. I can have your commission reinstated by morning. Full honors. Back to the 160th. Harper looked at the general. Then she looked at the balcony where Knox gave her a thumbs up. She looked at the nurses, David Kinsley, the team she had fought for. They were smiling at her, not as a stranger, but as one of their own. For the first time since leaving the service, the noise in Harper's head, the mortars, the screams, the guilt was quiet. "I appreciate the offer, General," Harper said softly, "but I think my mission is here." Holloway raised an eyebrow. "Here, scrubbing floors?" "No," Harper said, watching a new ambulance pull into the bay outside, its lights flashing red. "Saving lives. Besides," she gestured to the ER doors, where a gurney was being rushed in. "Someone has to make sure the new chief surgeon doesn't have a god complex." Holloway laughed, a deep barking sound. "Fair enough. Dismissed, Major." Harper nodded. She turned away from the cameras, away from the adulation, and walked toward the double doors of the emergency room. She didn't walk with her head down anymore. She didn't hide the shrapnel scar on her arm or the winged dagger tattoo on her wrist. She pushed through the doors, leaving the media circus behind, and stepped back into the chaos of the ER. The smell of antiseptic and blood hit her, and for the first time in a long time, it didn't smell like war. It smelled like work. "David," she called out, grabbing a fresh pair of gloves from a box on the wall. "Bay 4 needs a saline drip and a suture kit. Let's move." Harper Bennett was back on duty. The story of Harper Bennett reminds us that true strength isn't about rank, title, or how much money you have in the bank. It's about what you do when the pressure is on and lives are on the line. Dr. Preston thought his status made him untouchable, but he learned the hard way that you never judge a book by its cover, especially when that book is a combat-hardened veteran who has seen more in a day than he has in a lifetime. Harper didn't just save a patient. She saved the soul of that hospital, proving that one person standing up for what is right can bring down an empire of corruption. Did you enjoy this story? If you did, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you never miss a new story. What would you have done if you were in Harper's shoes? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.